everybody hear us? If you don't mind hitting your mic buttons, and, you know, when we get rolling here. Okay, who said Delegate Hodges? Is someone taking over your subcommittee?
Yes, sir.
And
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Chairman, strike Delegate Foxville.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, first order of business at the patron's request, we look for a motion to strike House Bill 723. Second. Move to second to strike House Bill 723. And so indicate so on the voting board. Everybody, oh, so everybody voted that wishes to vote? Okay, all, please close the roll. Motion strike 7-0. Okay. Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure should.
Thank you. Chairman. So, yeah, can I sit? This may take a little while.
You're gonna need, probably ought to have.
Or not. Or not. All right. Actually, before we get started, it's not on your docket today. House Bill is at 1566, I believe. Is that one mine? Is that the correct number?
It's not on the docket.
Not on the docket, but I would like to strike that bill if that's the correct number. Can't do that? Okay. It's my
It's not
intention.
before, so.
It's not before you, so it's my intention to strike that bill, just let the committee know. And
He can do it tomorrow morning.
It's
It's
full.
full.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any particular order?
Do you want to take them numerically?
Well, we can do numerically. We may want to do it by theme, if that's okay.
We'll kill him in whatever order you want.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you. Let's start with, muddy it up. Let's start with dredging that. How's that sound? You want to muddy it up? All right. We have before you House Bill 1091. Now, as Delegate Bell says, you know, explain the problem, then tell us what you need to do to fix it. Basically, what we're experiencing in these small creeks in the Commonwealth, identified, I believe, up to 95 creeks. Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck, Eastern Shore, these rural areas. For years, Congress has provided funding through earmarks to dredge these creeks. And as you know, earmarks have gone away at the federal level. So what has happened is these creeks are filling in. You know, and as they fill in, the Coast Guard is coming in and they're pulling up these markers, leaving these channels unmarked. It's not very good for business in our rural areas. You know, we talk about working waterfronts, embracing working waterfronts. In the Commonwealth, our watermen are limited in these creeks. The recreational boaters in and out of these creeks, the marinas suffer as boats go up and down the bay. If these channels aren't marked, then they're not plotted either. So folks aren't coming in and they're not buying gas up these creeks. So it's a major problem. So what do we do to fix it? So we're trying to come up with some tools. The first is House Bill 1091, and all that does is clarify that dredging is a project under Virginia Resource Authority. So it's fairly simple. You possibly already can dredging to be eligible as a project, but this just clarifies that dredging is a project for the Virginia Resource Authority. Fairly simple bill.
Okay, any questions of the patron and the committee?
No, Mr. Chairman. So what does this allow local government to do then?
To borrow money through VRA. Low interest, so they can assist them.
Yes.
Quick question. Where would this have been before? So it's under, it now says a dredging project falls in this category. Where would a dredging project have been before, or was it nowhere?
It's nowhere. So we were clarifying that a dredging project is eligible for these funds to borrow from VRA at low interest, to give our localities a tool to solve the problem for themselves. But we do? Oh, okay, we do have an amendment. Okay, this makes sense. And we do have, if you don't mind reading that amendment, and I can explain that.
Mr. Chairman, the line amendment for House Bill 1091 would go on line 101, on the second page, after the word government in the new language, we would insert, but does not include any dredging program or dredging project undertaken for or by the Virginia Port Authority.
So moved.
Second. Move to second to adopt the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.
The amendment is fairly explanatory, so
Okay.
to explain the Port Authority.
Okay, is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor? Anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition? Anyone in opposition to the measure? Doug Hodges, last word.
So it'd be the pleasure of the committee to pass the bill.
Move report. All right, so there's a motion to report. Is there a second?
Second.
Properly second. All those in favor signify on the voting board. Okay, close the roll, please. Okay, the motion carries 7-0. Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We now have House Bill 1096, and there is a substitute. And we may have some amendments to that, friendly amendments to that substitute as well. This is dredging. We have stormwater work. All right.
Just give everyone yeah, Kim.
There are changes that use this text, so I don't know if you want to adopt the substitute and then have me read the changes.
Has everybody had a chance to look at the substitute? Is there a motion to adopt the substitute?
The original bill.
I'm looking wrong, my bad, 1096.
Okay.
I've turned it up.
All right.
Never mind. Okay. Maybe not the plan. That's no, unheard of. It's unusual.
Okay, is there a motion to adopt the substitute?
So moved. Second.
Properly moved to second to adopt the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I mentioned, we're trying to solve these problems, and what we have found is in working with the Corps, who typically, is funding these programs. And if you can, and there are some small pots of money that may be available from the Corps that can assist with some of these dredging projects, but only a very small amount of money. And in talking with the Corps, there's basically a bottleneck in the permitting of dredge spoil sites. The dredge spoils, it's very expensive to transport them. You typically need to have those spoil sites within a certain proximity of where you are dredging. And what we're asking the commission to do in cooperation with DEQ and technical assistance from BIMS is to establish and implement a permitting process for these sites. And this will really help to solve our problems. Having pre-permitted sites can elevate these projects to a different level and make it more accessible to some federal funding that is available, but also help our localities to speed up this process. And we've been working with the agencies. There was some question of whether he was in control The Corps or DEQ, we actually have narrowed it down, so the Corps actually will take the lead in only in tidal areas. But they will still be working with the other agencies and Virginia Institute of Marine Science to accomplish this.
Okay, any questions of the patron from the committee?
Take up the best practice. That's a substitute. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we do have other changes.
Yes,
Yes.
okay, okay. No
I was
questions
gonna
on the
say-
substitute, but now, council, I think there's some amendments to the substitute?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, on this substitute, to create a new substitute, we would essentially strike the code section, lines 10 through 14. And we would leave only the enactment clause. And in that clause, on line, the end of line 15 and on to 16, where it says implement the provisions of this act, we would borrow some language from up above saying exactly what this act is. That language that we would borrow begins near the end of line 12, where it says establish and implement a fast-track permitting program and so on, to the end of that sentence.
Section 1.
It would become a section 1 bill, and we would take that, the goals, establishing and implementing a fast-track program, and put that down on line 15 and 16.
Okay.
It's a little bit cleaner and easier, but it accomplishes exactly what we're trying to do to solve this problem.
Okay, that's before us in the form of amendment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a motion on the amendment?
I move the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Amendment's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the bill the substitute as amended is before us. Doug Hodges, any other?
Hopefully, the pleasure of the committee to pass the bill.
Okay, well, a couple of questions that I have, when I look at, line currently, on the substitute line 18, exempt from the administrative process. Isn't there in the administrative process already a fast track process?
There is a fast track process, but what we're basically saying is to move forward with that process.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Orrock.
Can you tell me why? Because right now, APA takes about 2 years. There's already in place a fast track. It takes 12 to 14 months. We're now compressing that down to basically 5 months.
Yes, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, I have 2,000 signatures just from Matthews County to speed up this process and to try to solve this problem as soon as possible. We have marinas that will suffer and close down, the watermen are suffering, and the commerce along these creeks is suffering. And when you look at Matthews County with less than 800 jobs total in the county, including county government jobs, the working waterfronts are their bread and butter. And we need to try to find a way to fix this as fast as possible.
Delegate Hodges, and I gotta say another concern that I have is the idea that the exemption from the administrative process. And so, I mean, to me, I have concerns about, the public hearings and so forth. And I know it says in the last line, the commission shall provide an opportunity for public comment on the regulations prior to adoption, but it seems that's kind of.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, this does not in any way, shape, or form interfere with the practice of current dredging. All we're saying is, you can dredge now. It's not a problem to do that. If you have the funding and want to go through this and develop those spoil sites, you can do that, but it takes time to find the spoil sites. We're not interfering at all with the environment, with the dredging, the process of dredging, any of those things. All we're saying is we need to find a way to develop and have these predetermined sites. So when these projects come on board and are readily available, they can pull the trigger and move forward. So we're not interfering with the dredging process whatsoever. All we're doing here is to try to develop the sites. And It's a timely process right now because the way we're set up, it's an after fact to find these sites. So it's costing a lot of time and our localities a tremendous amount of money. The fast track regulations were put in for a reason and for this very reason. So when there's a public need to move forward with something that's urgent, we can pull the trigger and put that into play.
Okay. I guess I'm still a little uneasy about the public input process.
Sure.
You know.
And there's still public input.
He's got a moment of
Yes,
prayer.
okay, yeah, I'll.
Let me interject in the hopes that I can help a little bit. John
Yeah.
Bull, Commissioner of Marine Resources here, understand where Delegate Hodges is going here. As far as the exemption from the Administrative Process Act, BMRC already is. I'm not sure we need that clause, but be that as it may here, I think you all know us, or almost all of you know us, that we are an open and transparent agency, and I have open government as part of my DNA. We will hold everything in public. There will be plenty of public input. You don't have to worry about that in any way, shape, or form. The idea is to identify those on-water overboard disposal sites ahead of time so that this entire dredging process can happen quicker.
Any,
Thank you for that. I didn't realize you were exempt from the
any questions for the director? Okay, anyone wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Louis Lawrence, I'm the Executive Director for the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission. This is a bill that we've kind of put together to try to help our rural coastal jurisdictions get through the permitting process faster. But what Delegate Hodges forgot to mention to you all, what's core to making this work better is that we've got a suite of publicly owned properties right now that can be used as drudge pool receiving sites. So what we want to try to do is take advantage of the fact that we have public property available and to pre-validate those parcels through the permitting process. So when it becomes time to dredge, they've already been found compatible, they've already been vetted, and we're not having to get wrapped around the private property rights discussion of whether or not we should be using private property as drudge pool sites. So the first focus of this is to take advantage of public property that we already own. That's the new element that has never been injected into this type of permitting structure before, is the fact that we own a suite of public property strategically scattered across the Middle Peninsula that can serve in this capacity.
Ms. Lawrence, do you anticipate, so all right, currently the possibilities there for the properties. Could anything change in the next until it actually becomes a dredging site? Is there anything that could happen that would change
The utility of those public properties. The properties are owned by a public access authority, which I provide staff support to. So it's the Middle Peninsula Chesapeake Bay Public Access Authority. The properties are held in public trust for public benefit, both for recreational use and to support working waterfronts. So the likelihood that the access authority would divest itself of the property ownership is slim to none, because that defeats the purpose for which you all created the access authority in the beginning, was to solve these public access and working waterfront issues. So could the access authority sell assets? Absolutely, they could. Would they? There's slim to any chance that they're going to do that, because that slows down what we're trying to accomplish, which is to solve these problems at the local level.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Favor? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the measure? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Okay, no one running forward. Okay, any Dr. Hodges, any last comment? Any questions?
Pleasure of the committee to pass the bill. I will say, in meeting with the Corps and the state agencies, what we did find as a benefit is the public property, as Mr. Lard mentioned, because government to government working together, permitting is much easier than going government to private sector. This doesn't prohibit the government to private sector permitting, but those properties are available to be able to speed up this process.
Okay, we operate on measures. I'm sorry. Move to report. Makes a motion to report the bill. Is there a second?
Second.
properly second. All those in favor indicate on your voting board. Okay, close the rolls. Okay, the motion's reported. Doug Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's move on to stormwater. And, all right. House Bill 1307. And recall, last year, under House Bill 1774, created a very diverse work group, convened by the Commonwealth Center for Flooding and Resiliency, which is a partnership between the Coastal Policy Center, Old Dominion University, and Virginia Institute of Design. So there you have the law, you have the engineers, and then you have the science working together to solve the problem. Primarily the infamous donut hole, if you recall that 2,500 square feet. But we're fixing it with this bill, actually the next two bills. We found a way to do it. You know, I think we've solved some problems with this work group. Problems folks said could not be solved, but bringing these folks together and hashing it out, they really came together to solve some problems. We have the science behind it to really show how this works. And in a nutshell, what we're able to show with the science is until you get to a certain level, say 10% within a certain drainage area, the effect on the Chesapeake Bay, to paraphrase, it doesn't matter. So 10% impervious hard surface cover. Until you get to that 10%, it doesn't make no impact on the bay. So when you look at our rural coastal region, so the Middle Peninsula, the Northern Neck, and the Eastern Shore, you have these very strict and stringent stormwater standards. So here you're the 2,500 square feet to an acre stormwater projects, and actually when we looked at those, there were very few across the Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck, and Eastern Shore. So, our localities did not have the expertise to deal with that. They're already have opted out of over an acre. So here you're telling them to deal with the 2,500 square foot to an acre, and they don't have the expertise. So basically what this committee came up with was a tiered approach using, I guess, the old MS-19 standards. And I'm not going to get into the technical aspects. The scientists, everybody came together to work this out to that tiered approach within that certain drainage area until you hit 7.5%, okay, impervious cover, until you implement the full stormwater standards, if that makes sense. This actually came out of the committee unanimously, working together to solve this problem. So it's a way for our localities to be able to deal with this. You have full protection for the bay and the watershed, and we've been able to solve this problem in this donut hole. We want that mom and pop type of business that can afford the stormwater and to protect the bay. At those higher levels, those mom and pop projects that we traditionally know and love in our area, it'd be very hard to get those folks. So this solves a problem by bringing folks together, and this came out of that 1774 work group. So, another amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this is
I
just
don't have that one.
it's a technical amendment, just to clarify things. On line 465, on the last page of the bill, after that code section in parentheses, we would add these words, and in effect prior to July 1, 2014.
Could you explain us the practical effect of that amendment?
Certainly, that makes clear that the regulations we're talking about in the first tier on lines 464 and 465 are what are called the old MS-19 standards or regulations, and not whatever they might be currently, as they've changed over the years.
Okay. Is there a motion on the amendment? Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, any questions of the paper by the committee? Delegate Ware.
On lines 159 to 160, you talk about, you define rural tidewater locality means any locality, and then there's some verbiage that is impervious to my understanding, but I'm hoping that you all have figured out that these are the right places.
These are the localities in the rural coast of Virginia, Community Enhancement Authority that was established in code.
I can see
So
that.
I did that last year, but with this, and that's actually moving forward.
All you need to tell me is yes.
Yes, yes, sir.
These are the
Yes, sir.
localities, and you're sure.
These
Okay.
are the localities.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions of the patron? Okay, is there anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of the measure? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm not speaking in opposition, but I'm speaking by way of explanation. This is, as
Please identify yourself.
Sorry, Peggy Santa, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. This is, as Delegate Hodges says, a compromise bill. We, Bay Foundation, entered into the discussions, pleased to be at the table to talk about how to address a problem that Delegate Hodges identified. The problem as we envisioned it was that Bay Act localities have for many years been doing a little bit of extra work, some people say a lot of extra work, at the 2,500 square feet to acre size for, in other words, they had to do more in disturbing land in that range than people outside the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act area. So from our perspective, we entered into the discussion to try to, in some sense, offset that responsibility by approaching the issue in a different way. From our perspective, we wanted to make sure that water quality was protected and to the best of our abilities, based on the scientists and other experts who appeared, and given the particular hydrology of the region, we felt that we were able, consistent with our own principles, to agree to this bill. I'm making this statement only to make it clear that the Bay Foundation has not given up its commitment to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act or a very strong stormwater program, and to underscore that this compromise was for that particular purpose and not for any other. So thank you for allowing me to make that statement.
No Christmas trees.
No Christmas tree. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone's, well, so that wasn't officially against the measure, but any other thoughts? Okay.
I would just like to thank all of the folks around the table, all of the stakeholders, and especially Miss Elizabeth Andrews, who's here, I believe. Hopefully, she deserves a lot of credit for this bill and the next bill, and moving forward with some ideas and solving problems that a lot of folks said really couldn't be solved. And she really heard that and made all of this possible. And I'd just like to say thank you.
Thank you, Doug Hodges. Okay, is there a motion?
The report is amended.
Okay. Properly moved and seconded to report the bill as amended. All those in favor signify on the voting board. Okay, please close the roll. The motion is reported 7-0. Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, sir. House Bill 1308, also out of the work group. I believe we have an amendment there. That was, that, 1308, I have, got the locality, stroke, shall, and circles authorized.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, on House Bill 1308, on line 220, after the word locality, strike the word shall and insert the words is authorized. I probably should be, yes, that's correct, is
That's
authorized.
correct.
It seems strange, but when you read it up above, it all works out. 1308, 220.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, on House Bill 1308, on line 220, after the word locality, strike the word shall and insert the words is authorized. I probably should be, yes, that's correct, is authorized, but when you read it up above, it all works out.
Wouldn't just want to put May?
You would think it would be, is authorized to, but, I believe there's a reason we phrased it that way. No,
think,
maybe that, I think it was in the bill. Mr. Chairman, it probably should say is authorized to.
And I believe,
Put May one. Funny.
I think you're all, should have been a Delta committee with trees. Oh, we got trees on too.
Okay, so are we good on the amendment? Okay, is there a motion on the amendment? Move, is there a second?
Second.
Properly second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the bill is amended before us. Doug Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, we're dealing with the infamous Doug Hole, the land disturbance from 2,500 square feet to an acre. And when looking at the number of projects in these localities and the survey in the rural coastal region, on average, across the rural coastal region, localities permitted less than 2 commercial land disturbing projects, less than 1 acre. So, we were saying, all right, guys, you have to have the expertise to deal with this. They don't have the expertise. So basically, all this bill does, it says, all right, professional engineer, you're designing this, you're stamping it, you're moving forward, and that's the stormwater permit. They have all of the liability, they have all of the risk in dealing with this. These are, small projects, and to be able to move forward with the stormwater permit from DEQ. Actually very simple fix to a complex problem. And again, it came out of the work group, after a lot of discussion and a lot of debate.
Any questions of the patron of the committee? Doug Bolt.
If I could, because I've been tracking this for a
Sure,
while, and
sure.
going through different machinations. But I wanted to check and see whether that second enactment clause was also part of those discussions. And I know it's just aspirational in terms of looking at possibilities or opportunities for the agreement in lieu of a stormwater plan to include commercial properties. But I didn't know whether that was something that was included in those discussions or not. And I guess the reason I asked is because there's a really big difference between a single-family residential property and a commercial property with respect to its potential impact on stormwater quality.
Sure, and I've had the experts here. I think I can answer that, but if I may defer to the experts.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Elizabeth Andrews, Director of the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at Illinois Law School. Yes, that was part of the discussions, the group came to consensus and agreed that should be a subject for further research. So that's why it's in the enactment clause and not in legislation.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions of the patron? Okay, anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure? In favor? Please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tom Swartzwelder. I'm the county attorney in Queen County and the chairman of the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission, and I had the pleasure of serving on this Andrews board and participating in these conversations. This bill really is critical and going hand in hand with the tiered approach, and it really assists local government in streamlining these projects, not only on behalf of the government, but on behalf of the applicant. Under the current stormwater bill, the applicant at the end of their project has to submit stamped as-built, as well as have stormwater inspections performed by a licensed engineer. It's almost always the same engineer who designed the project. So it became sort of counterintuitive to require these small localities to have an engineer review the engineer who then reviews his own work at the very end. So the developer, or in this case it could be the small mom and pop, has already retained an engineer to do their design. This enables the county to accept those stamp plans with certain language on them as being in compliant with the Stormwater Act and not have the need to review the reviewer, if you will, which speeds the project up for everybody, reduces cost to the development community, and gets these really small projects back on track. It's really important that this goes hand in hand with the tiered approach though, because under the tiered approach at the local level, we're required to track the amount of impervious that's added in each one of these development districts to track those percentage Delegate Hodges spoke to you all about. That same engineer would help the locality make those determinations. If we know we're at 3% impervious, he's got to tell us how much impervious he or she is adding in that groundwater district so that we can update and track our maps on the periodic basis that would be required should you be so kind as to adopt this. So it's very important to us, and we feel that it really streamlines things. I believe this also passed through Ms. Andrews unanimously after much discussion. We would just let you know that those of us out in rural Virginia would really appreciate your support on that.
Thank you. If I could ask a
Yes, sir.
couple of questions. So my understanding is that with the amendment, we have two fail-safes, which is that the locality may utilize this approach, and then they may accept at the end. And so if something goes wrong in between, or they start thinking, hey, maybe we ought to be taking a look at that, they can decide that they want to do their own review and not fall through with the process. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes, sir, absolutely. There was much discussion about that, and that the localities still want to be able to maintain control to make things so that things are compliant. So you would have that fail-safe, of course, along with the engineer's stamp and the responsibility, professional responsibility that goes in hand with that.
Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the measure? Okay, seeing none. Delegate Hodges, last word.
Thank you, sir. I just really appreciate everyone's help on these bills, and hopefully get the pleasure of the committee to pass.
Chairman, move to report as amended.
There's properly moved and seconded to report the bill as amended. All those in favor signify on the voting board. Okay, please close the rolls. The bill is reported 7-0. Okay, Delegate Hodges.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This idea actually for House Bill 1094 basically comes from a group of folks that live and deal with the repetitive flooding in our rural coastal region. We experience it seems like almost daily. Delegate Stolle created the Current Flood Commission. And oftentimes we talk about the urban areas in the Norfolks, and those are dealing with flooding. In these rural areas, you have a nor'easter and a little bit of rain, schools close. Roads are flooded, property is damaged. And left unaddressed, basically our drylands becoming wetter, our wetlands becoming super saturated, the homeowners are experiencing property loss, economic devaluation. Matthews County, and correct me if I'm wrong, in their last assessment, lost $70 million, I believe. And Matthews County, second smallest land area in the Commonwealth of Virginia, 6,000 to 7,000 people. That's a lot of money, and that's a hard hit on these property owners. So what we're looking at here, and if you look at the summary, it directs the State Water Control Board to adopt regulations to establish criteria for use by local governments in granting, denying, or modifying a request by any landowner within the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area to raise the base elevation of his land for the purpose of mitigating the effects of flooding. Now, at first glance, you look at that and say, hey, we're filling in the RPA. That's not what this is doing. If you look at line, where are we? Starting with line 16, such regulations shall include provisions for the protection of existing wetlands and may include provisions for the placement of earth or the creation of a living shoreline extending vertically as a means of flooding mitigation. So basically what we're saying is, let's maintain the current environment and the ecological site characteristics as of today. You have wetlands today, let's keep the wetlands today. And in some areas, and we can talk to the science, I've talked to some folks down at VIMS and had those discussions, and this can be done. You're not just going in there dumping a truckload of dirt and filling in, you're actually doing it in a way to maintain the status of the wetlands that you already have to protect your home and your properties. And just a small amount can have a dramatic effect in these low-lying areas, especially areas in my district like Matthews County and some areas that you have over on the eastern shore. So that's basically the bill in a nutshell. It's kind of hard to get your arms around and understand where we're going, but when you think through it,
Okay. Any questions of the patron of the committee? Of the patron from the committee? Doug, notice.
So I hear about dredging and I hear about filling in. Is there a way to put those two together?
I wish we could. You can't just take and dredge and dump it anywhere. So I wish there was a very simple answer. You know, in some of our regulations moving forward, hopefully we can. Well, let's just say this. Actually, depending on the dredge spoils, those dredge spoils can be used in building living shorelines or protecting certain areas. So that, but it's a permit process to be able to do that. So it would be nice if we could just fix it very easily. But complex issue.
Judge Ferris, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. Question of the patron. Do some of these localities have these criteria now?
And I'm gonna let our local government, I mean, there's a process for dealing with, you know, these areas and if I may defer to our local government and how they actually handle this on an individual basis. Actually, it's a case-by-case basis where they deal with some things, but this really gives our tools and puts the science behind dealing with, you know, protecting your land.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, I guess that's what I'd like to hear is what are we doing now? What do we do now if I decide I want to bring 12 loads of dirt in and
Well, there's
add to my property?
And I would say there's a difference between trying to fill in, where you have to mitigate, and this is basically, we're trying to protect the land that you already have. So, and if I may defer to probably some of our local governments, and the expert, the county administrator, attorney, and planning, and these three jobs.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, again, Tom Swartzwelder, County Attorney Administrator in King and Queen, and Chairman of the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission. Mr. Delegate, the only process that I'm aware of currently that localities have is the Chesapeake Bay exception process, under which an applicant, for a myriad of reasons, can apply to a local planning commission or BZA and get an exception to put things in the resource protection area, the RPA, which is the sort of 100 feet inland of the last, you know, watering, if you will, feature of soils, plants, et cetera. It's a bit of a moving target. That process is commonly used for things like patios, porches, pavers. The problem here that we're talking about is fundamentally different. There's an area, for example, in Matthews County, I have friends who live who carry rubber boots in their cars because when we have a full moon high tide, they have a ½ inch of water in their yard, okay? We're trying to address the socks wet debate, if you will. So under the current process, it would be virtually impossible, in my opinion, for a locality to grant an exception under those set of rules because of the criteria imposed by the General Assembly. The first criteria that have to be met, so when a planning commission or BZA is going to grant this application to you, they have to make specific findings. And the first finding they have to make is that you're not conferring upon the applicant any special privileges not available to everybody else in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area. Well, in and of itself, that becomes a problem because this is a problem shared by multiple people in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area. So I'm not sure how that finding could be made on a legal basis. In other words, the commission is not allowed to do something for you that gives you a privilege that other people similarly situated don't get. That's the current state of the law. The second requirement that they have to make is that it's the least intrusive manner in which to do it. The problem again for that is it's a purely arbitrary standard. What the Planning Commission may feel is the least intrusive way to do it may not be what the Chesapeake Bay DEQ reviewers feel when they come down. So you're taking a process that's really, in my opinion, designed for a small homeowner want or need, and you're applying it in a situation where you're trying to actually preserve their property, not just have a deck. It's a much larger issue, but I don't think anybody, at least on my level, is talking about feet of water. We're talking about trying to help the people address the ½ inch, ¼ inch inch of water issue. Does that help you at all? I mean, it's a cumbersome process now that, and I believe any of the folks here that are involved in this will tell you, it's very difficult to meet the criteria, very difficult to actually grant an exception.
Any other questions of the paper? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Just please.
Yes, sir. Again, Louis Lawrence, the Executive Director from the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission. This is a ubiquitous problem facing all jurisdictions that have RMA features. So every county is struggling with 15, 20, 30 years ago, you could walk around in the yard and your socks and your feet wouldn't get wet. Now your feet are wet all the time. So wetter ground is going to continue to get wetter. We're going to continue to see a shift in the ecological features within the RPA. What we're trying to say is that is there a way that we can both environmentally and socially create solutions that are responsible, that can hold the line based off of the current environmental features that are there right now? Can we add supplemental sediment? Can we increase the environmental features so that we don't continue to go backwards? If we leave this problem unaddressed, we're going to continue to see an erosion of taxable real estate at the local level. As Delegate Hodges mentioned, Matthews lost $70 million. Is it 100% tied to this? No. Is it a contributing factor? Absolutely. Accomack just had their reassessment done. Tremendous loss of real estate value that's there. These are indicators of a much larger problem, and every year that we continue to not address this challenge, our local governments are going to fall further and further behind. And folks should not have to bring in dirt in the middle of the night to put down to dry their yards. We can find a better way to permit these projects. We can find a better way to enhance the environment, and we can protect water quality at the exact same time. In closing, I'd like to offer that you should not have to go back and ask for a special exception for a problem that impacts practically every single parcel that's out there. We need a solution that works for the Commonwealth, for everybody. It should not be on a case-by-case special exception process, because it's not a special exception. The problem is everywhere. We need better rules to deal with a real problem right now. Thank you all.
Delegate Ferris.
So tell me how this works. If my neighboring landowner modifies, raises the base elevation of his land and pushes that water doesn't evaporate, but then he pushes that water into my farmland. What happens to me when I want to address that extra water in my bean field that's come out of his acre yard that's now causing 3 more acres of my bean field to be wet? Is there a special, I don't see anything in here. It talks about provision protecting existing wetlands, provision of placements of earth, and creation of living shorelines instead of vertically the means of flooding mitigation, but I don't see where it protects anybody else's, any neighboring properties, from the mitigation of that water. You know, I mean, if you push water, it's gotta go somewhere.
Do you want to answer for me, Delegate Clark, and then I can chime in too?
Mr. Chairman, I think the difference is we're not stopping flowing water. We're talking about water from the ground up. So I'm not, your ground's gonna be wet no matter what if you don't change the level of your ground. If I change the level of my ground, I'm just getting above the water table. Problem is that the ground is saturated everywhere. So I'm not stopping the flow. It's not like a water coming, I'm not damming it up so it backs up into you. It's coming from the bottom up.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Ferris.
I'm not a physicist, but that area that was water, you're now gonna fill that with soil. So now there's soil, so the water level is gonna raise along with the soil to take the, take the place of the water. I mean, you don't just raise it, you just don't put dirt on top of water and raise the water up, and raise the soil up. The soil, the water has to go somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's more tied to the tide coming in and going out than it is with, there's so much water here. It's got more to do with when the creek is high tide, you'll have water. When the creek goes out, it won't be. Things get more to do with it.
My bean field is sitting there at high tide, low tide, full moon, dark moon. And when you change your yard, I mean, am I wrong in to believe, Mr. Chairman, that that dirt is placed there, that it's pushed?
Ken, but this, those things, we're saying establish a regulatory process, and a regulatory process is broad enough to address those types of issues. This will be done will be site specific. So if that's gonna be a problem or that's gonna be an issue, then it's not gonna work in that particular location. So, in the regulatory process, you'll have all of that public comment. You'll go through all of those things to address those concerns.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Ferris.
I still have a great concern that there's nothing here that it talks about existing wetlands and, existing wetlands and living shorelines, but it doesn't say anything about protecting, neighboring properties, whether they be highlands, lowlands, wetlands, or.
I think, the purpose of the bill, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is to solve the problem, within our region with losing all of these properties because of the recurrent flooding. And, the regulatory process, I firmly believe, will address those concerns. And if it's not gonna work, and actually, the local governments, so you'll have provisions on line 2 for use by local governments in granting, denying, or modifying a request by any landowner. So, you'll have the public comment from neighboring landowners. They'll come out and they'll either permit it or they won't permit it. If it's gonna flood the neighboring land, they won't get that permit. And I can.
Okay, Delegate Orrock.
Mr. Chairman, I may be proposing an amendment, but I think to get to Delegate Ferris's issue, if on line 16 at the end of the line, we added, and for the protection of adjoining properties. So that the regs would have to include provisions for the protection of existing wetlands and for the protection of adjoining properties. So that they would have to, as they considered his application, consider the impacts on adjoining properties who may have not, tendered an application, but if we approved yours, it's gonna make my neighbor have to come back next week for, did I come close on the wordsmithing? He doesn't like my words, he's got better words.
Mr. Chairman, I think we could just say and adjoining properties, and I think that would cover it.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate
Works
Ferris.
for me. I move the amendment.
Before anyone seconds it, I'm not worried, I'm also worried about me not being my cousin's neighbor, per se, his joining neighbor, but being his neighborhood, and the only person in the General Assembly is not weird, is fine with water being on his property. And neighboring properties, this could get into.
With other properties.
No, I mean, in looking at it, and if I may, respond, for the purpose of mitigating the effects of flooding. And when you look at that, the effects of flooding affect this land, this land, this land, and this land. So I think you already capture that because it's the effects of flooding on all properties. So, I don't know if there is a way to wordsmith it, to satisfy Delegate Ferris's concerns, because, it could be any properties, it could be, down the way.
Delegate Randall.
Yeah, and if I could, because
Sure.
I'm sympathetic to the the issue here, but I'm hearing kind of conflicting stuff, so I'm hearing that it's a high groundwater table issue.
Well.
Cause you're walking out there and, which case, if you've got that, you've got a wetlands issue. And, you know, that's a whole another side of things, and then if it's tidal, then I think Delegate Ferris does have a very good point. At any time that you squeeze water from one area, it's gonna affect properties all around it. So I think we need to be careful how we're working this. I did have a, you know, point with regard to this applying to Chesapeake Bay preservation areas, because at least up in my area, we do jurisdiction-wide Chesapeake Bay preservation areas. And so I'm not sure that we're really targeting this towards Chesapeake Bay preservation areas, because that's your resource management area. You can pretty much do almost anything you want in our MA. You're really talking about your resource protection area. But again, the reason why I'm real cautious about whatever we do here is because that is your 100-foot of land that buffers perennial streams, it buffers tidal wetlands, non-tidal wetlands. And so there's a reason it's protected, because, you know, that is the most ecologically sensitive aspects of the Chesapeake Bay and some of your inland areas. And so I don't mind looking at this. I just hate to get the ball rolling on regulations when I'm not quite sure that we have a really good handle on all the issues that might be associated with this.
Perhaps, this could be in the last minute or so. You know, last year with House Bill 1774, we created that work group, sent it to the Commonwealth Center for Flooding and Resiliency. That center was created for this specific purpose, for the General Assembly to say, hey, you saw this problem. So this may be a good piece of legislation to send to the center, where you have the policy, you have the science, and then you have the expertise. So that may be a good place for them to take a look at it.
If
I could, and with the idea that there's no guarantees that they're gonna be able to come up with a compromise or a solution. I think we lucked out with the last two, because we were able to come up with something. I think you're correct, that would be an appropriate place to get the experts around and vet through it, so that at least when it comes back, we have a sense of whether there's consensus, no consensus, how the science supports it or how the science doesn't support it.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, if that was the agreement of the committee to say, all right, let's send it to the center, we can sit down this week, come up with some language to send it there and bring it back. It should be a 2-minute bill, if that works for you. I mean, because we'll have to develop some language on what to charge them with.
Delegate Ware?
I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but I heard from the local government folks that there's some urgency with the wet socks in moving this forward. And it seems to me that the language is broad enough that it can accommodate the concerns that have, I think, quite rightly been expressed here. For example, the last sentence says such regulations shall include this and may include that, but it doesn't delimit what can be included in those regulations. And it would seem to me capacious enough to include the things that we've said here. But that said, I'm willing to go with the committee if we think it's the wiser course. But I did hear some urgency there in that presentation.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, you know, question of the patron, or I would like to hear from the audience.
Just speaking to that point, on the timeliness, because we're not fast tracking the APA, it's 2 years out before the rates would be going into effect anyway. And so I'm not sure, 2 years, 3 years, I don't know how much difference that's gonna make to have the folks look at it and come back next session. Because I think if they did that, came back next session with an expedited APA, not a total elimination, you end up having come out at about the same time. But with having some more scientific and objective input. So that's gonna be my feelings and thoughts on what I want to see. Not let this go forward as it is, but let it be science worked on.
Okay, is there any other, one wishing to speak in favor of the measure? There we go. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition or that has concern for the measure?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Peggy Sanders, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I would say we are very respectful of the problems that gave rise to this bill, and are appreciative across the watershed are being experienced because of sea level rise, and that those aren't going to go away. Our concern with this bill is that it seems not to articulate certain sort of parameters that we want the regulations to be mindful of. One is to ensure that the goals of Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, including those goals that are most prominently expressed in connection with the resource protection area, be maintained. And as it exists, we can envision some things arising from regulations potentially to come from this process that would create problems. We don't see any reference to the need not to have hardened surfaces, for example, or we don't see any language that would prevent the construction of steep slopes that might be unstable and lead to greater sedimentation in receding waters. Those are issues that we think would need to be addressed, and we would want to see some language in the statute that would incorporate those protections, that would ensure that those protections would be incorporated in the regulations. One particular area of concern is the reference to protecting existing wetlands. We think that's of course appropriate, but we do know that we will be seeing encroaching wetlands as a result of sea level rise. And ensuring that those wetlands are allowed to be protected as well, respected, is likely to be part of a scientifically sound approach to sea level rise. And so we want to make sure that that was taken into account as well. So there are a number of issues that we think should be incorporated in this. We think perhaps it would be best to have language in code so that the regulators could properly take them into account. And so, as the bill exists right now, we oppose it. We would certainly be amenable to amendments that might be raised, mentioned to address these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the measure?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Adrian Catulo with the James River Association. We also have multiple concerns with the legislation as it currently stands. And as Delegate Hodges knows, we are happy to work with folks on the issue as we have been on the stormwater issue over the last year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, delegates, my name is Pat Calvert. I represent Virginia Conservation Network. We have over 100 conservation environmental organizations across the Commonwealth, including Wetlands Watch, Pay Foundation, James River Association, and others. Our organization is in opposition to this bill as written, but we would like to see some of these improvements made. I think we share a lot of the concerns that Delegate Ferris shared, and what you just heard from these groups.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor or in opposition to the measure? I could call on her and scare her. Sorry. Okay, Delegate Hodges, I think what I'm hearing, from the committee and from those, we're empathetic to your situation, but you're not the only one with the situation. I mean, it's an area-wide problem.
Virginia, the northern Middle Peninsula, eastern shore, these rural localities, we talk about, existing wetlands and encroaching wetlands. So are we saying to folks, let these wetlands encroach your property, and the only thing you can do is raise your house? Not, and this came up earlier, R-A-I-S-E, not raise, R-A-Z-E. So, not saying tear your house down, but that's basically what's happening. We've got we need to find a way that's an environmentally sound way that still protects the environment, protects water quality, to be able to do something to protect that property.
Right.
And there is a need. It's something that we've been dealing with in our rural coastal region for some time, and we're trying to find a way to solve the problems. But if we could, it may be a good issue to let the scientists, the policymakers, and those folks really sit down and look at this, and the scientists, maybe send it over to the center, we can come up with some language.
Procedurally, and I guess I'm looking at Elizabeth, do we need a section 1 bill that would ask for the center to pick this up and look at it? Do they got the capacity to do that? And/or is it just as easy to lay on the table if Elizabeth is willing to say that, yes, they'll go ahead and pick it
Well,
up
this is-
and run with it?
It's probably a discussion I need to have with her too.
Yeah.
She's smiling
But,
at least.
This ain't, the bus is right behind you.
Let me wipe off the tread marks. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I actually have not had an opportunity to run this by my partners in the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resiliency, so I can't speak to the capacity. But over the coming week, as Delegate Hodges mentioned, I could check with them on that, but I'm not able to speak to that tonight because they're not here. Being Old Dominion University in DIMS.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I think you have Doug Ferris.
I move that we gently lay this deal on the table until next week.
So Bob.
Yes, but you
Yeah,
mean
it's
Bob,
not-
yeah.
Bob for the day, okay.
Yeah, with, Doug Hodges, with the understanding that, we're not gonna move it forward as is, but we're gonna try to fashion some language
Yes,
to
sir.
get it to the right place.
Let's do that.
Okay, all right,
Find a way to make this work. So-
is there a motion to pass the bill by today?
Yes. Second.
Second, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right. James here, I believe. Eldon, Texas.
Right here.
There you are. Good. All right. House Bill 493. As you know, some of you know, I chair the Rappahannock River Basin Commission. And over the course of the last, I believe, 4 years, in partnership with the Department of Forestry, local, state, non-governmental partners, we've worked over those four years to demonstrate the effectiveness, the conservation of existing forest land as a Chesapeake Bay TMDL implementation tool. And basically, in working with our jurisdictions, the questions, Eldon, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of miles he put on his vehicle traveling around the Rappahannock River Basin, talking with folks, in the value of conserving forest land and showing that forest land protects water quality. Because of this work, for the first time ever, the TMDL Bay implementation tool credits land conservation into that TMDL model. So our localities actually get credit for preserving forest land, which is actually one bill that came out of county, cities, and towns, I believe, is on the floor tomorrow. This is a big step, actually. So how can we actually move forward and do some things to use this to our benefit? So one of the strategies that folks came up with is, all right, how can we incentivize forest conservation and to include forest cover with SLAP funding, which you actually already can do, but to give our small localities, mainly our small non-MS4 localities, some flexibility in, I guess the easiest way to put it is the administrative and the management costs in the funding, and they can use a portion of the administrative costs and the grant funding towards that SLAP funding. Now, I do believe in working, there were concerns with DEQ and using some tax exempt bonds and administrative costs for localities to use the administrative costs, and I believe there are some amendments.
You
For a
have
substitute?
the substitute,
Have a substitute, okay. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, give the substitute report.
Okay, is there a motion on the substitute? Second.
Second.
All right, motion second to adopt the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, the bill, the substitute is before us, Delegate Hodges.
And I have not, I may get with Eldon to see if this fixes the concerns with the department. But basically, what we're looking at doing is allowing a portion of the grant to be set aside for administrative costs for these smaller localities that don't have the expertise and folks to administer these grants.
Delegate Orrock.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and understand, I think, Bill, but keep with this. Now, grant monies that were supposed to go for a project, at cost certain, shall we say, with the local match. Now we're cycling off part of the money that we go for the quote project. gets consumed by the local government. Currently, do not those administrative costs by local government not go against any cost match requirement? Because if they don't, then it looks like to me we're doing two things. That we're giving them some money up front to administer, and then if this doesn't cover it all, this counts as part of your match. And that's gonna have a significant impact on how much we can do with those grant monies that are being left.
I'm gonna let Eldon get in the weeds with this, get in the trees with it if you don't.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Eldon James, and I serve as the staff for the Rappahannock River Basin Commission. And if I may just do a little background that will help answer the question that Delegate Ora has asked. We did work over a 3-year period to develop this report that dealt with phase 1 and phase 2. We're now on the cusp of moving into phase 3. Phase 1 demonstrated the financial benefit for land development efforts, whether it be a private sector development or whether it be a public capital investment like a school, in the conservation of existing forest cover versus mowing everything down and then having to build structural BMPs. Significant cost savings to the point where that convinced EPA Bay program that they're making an update to the model now. Forest conservation will be included, and that was a vote taken by the Principals Committee in December, will be included as a creditable activity in the Bay model going forward. It really comes through the efforts of the Department of Forestry and us, River Basin Commission, our various partners. Phase 2 was an effort to meet with stakeholders to talk about what would people be willing to do, either a local government or in the development community, to promote forest conservation, and what kind of activities would they not support. In the course of those discussions, some of the smaller non-MS4 localities brought up the desire to incentivize the use of SLAF funds. Now, one of the issues that came out in the discussion was that if we, the collective we, Virginia's Chesapeake Bay effort, is going to make our 2025 goals, there's going to need to be an effort of investment by the state in non-point source pollution comparable to the point source pollution that got us to meeting the 2017 goals. We heard that up and down the basin. Department of Forestry and River Basin Commission and our consultants held 62 meetings across the basin to listen to stakeholders from every group. Relative to the SLAF program, and getting to answering your question, Delegate Oron, the non-MS4 localities are not under any regulatory imperative to do stormwater projects, because stormwater improvements or non-point source improvements in those localities rests with the state. There's no regulatory scheme that drives a Culpeper or a Caroline to have to do non-point source projects. Of course, everybody's interested in looking at those projects because they do benefit the landscape and they do benefit efforts. So what we heard from some of those localities was if we could be a little more attractive to access SLAF funds, our boards of supervisors would be more willing to consider them. The two strategies that were identified that are in the bill are, one, that the SLAF funds could be used for part of the administrative cost, and the localities could use as match in-kind activities that might include actually some of the physical work. And so we're blurring a little bit the admin. One was admin, one was in-kind, not paid for by the fund, but be recognized as match. So if you put town crews on improving the stream bank in the town park, which has a half a mile of stream frontage, you're improving the town park as a value to that town to engage in the project. It also has a water quality benefit, and you're kind of getting a twofer. These were the kinds of inputs that were given to us. Again, part of that is premised on the state's growing investment. If we're investing $2 million a year, the delegate is correct. If we're investing $2 million a year in SLAB funds, there's just not enough to go around to pay those added costs, and hence why the wording is the department may, and not that the department shall. I hope that answers your question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it does, but it kind of, you've answered it, and the answer is yes, you're wanting both. You're wanting money and a new policy where that what isn't covered now counts as in kind.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, as you just alluded to, the pot of money isn't big enough to solve all the problems we've got anyway. So by allowing this, we're gonna be eating up more of that pot of money and not seeing capital projects implemented as a result, because it's set aside right on line 29, existing language, the grant shall be used solely for stormwater capital projects. And so I have pause when we're gonna allow capital projects monies, part of it to be diverted at local government level for them to administrative costs, which is a pretty nebulous term, frankly. I don't have quite the heartburn if we're gonna allow them to use their local government administrative costs as half of the match, as the second part of this bill references and allows. Because I think you're still incentivizing local governments more than you currently do, but you're not letting grant monies just intended for a capital project are now being eaten up in administrative costs. That's just a new policy.
Well, and I understand exactly what you're saying, and I do not disagree with you, but what we heard in those input sessions were for the smaller localities, that investment in the project by the locality is part of what's necessary to get a capital project built. They don't just happen, they have to be managed. And we tried to identify language with DEQ that gives them the leeway to write the rules. If we're in a year when funds are thin, they can be tighter in how they award it. And there'll be fewer non-MS4 type locality projects. Again, non-MS4 locality projects that gain credit towards the Bay TMDL, the credit goes to the Commonwealth, not to the locality.
Mr. Chairman, I think one of the beauties of SLAP over the years is that it's been a purely bricks and mortar program, because that's what we really need is stuff to build capital projects. And I'm looking at Mr. Taylor trying to make sure I'm correct on this, which is that the state match has always been for capital, and that indeed the local match has always been for capital. And so it's never been the policy for SLAP that you could do in kind. And I understand the points you're making. If we were truly had a pot of money that we were encouraging people to use, but I think the latest study from the Stormwater Management Association, which is all the localities out there, is we got $125 million worth of projects that are ready to go in 2 years. And so, that's $75 million worth of SLAP grant funding. We want to maximize the match on it. So I'm just concerned about crossing that Rubicon over to watering down a grant program that's just historically been for capital projects only. It's not so.
Mr. Chairman, kind of following up on that, but I think this is a bridge too far. I want to provide some incentive, but this is a major policy change. I'm going to throw out for the subcommittee's consideration, if we amend it, on line 34, if you struck all the new language through bonds on 36. And then on line 37, after services, if you struck not paid for by funds awarded from the fund shall, and you put in may. And on line 38, no more than half, strike the half and insert 1/4. We're still allowing local governments are getting something to incentivize them, because part of their administrative costs will count as what previously has been a cash match. But we're not, half, and we're gonna give you monies, we're taking monies that intended for bricks and mortar type of deals, not literally, but, a long-standing and we're diluting it with administrative costs, which are real costs. But the state's got administrative costs in the game too, and, you know, we eat those in our budget. I don't know if that's something the patron would be amenable to. If he's not, I won't propose
If
it.
it will get us there, it's.
Well,
Go ahead,
let's,
Mr. James.
Okay, I'm not gonna mess with it, I just don't know, it's okay.
I mean, if it'll get us there, then we can always come back.
Council,
If it's successful, we can come back next year.
yeah, let's, like, council, do you have some input?
I would be happy to read back a suggestion for the amendment, but I don't have
An opinion on it? Okay. All right, well, but before we go that far, you know, for adopting amendment, let's hear, any other questions of the patron? Let's hear from anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the measure. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the measure?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Mike Polycons with the Municipal League, we are in full support of this bill that Delegate Hodges put in for us to help the smaller localities of our members and work with those ever increasing stormwater projects as again, so we can meet our big goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris McDonald, Virginia Association of Counties. For the reasons stated by Ms. Polycrons as well as Mr. James, we also like to state our firm support for this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wishing to speak in opposite, ma'am?
Thank you, from over here, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Sherry Neal, City of Portsmouth, we support.
In favor? Yeah, super.
Strong
Thank you, ma'am.
support.
Thank you, ma'am. Right, any more in favor? Anyone else in favor? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition of the measure? Okay, seeing none, all right, let's, back to the issue at hand, from the, committee, concerns, more dialogue. Delegate Hodges?
And I understand their concerns, Mr. Chairman. You know, this is something that we've been working on for 4 years to incentivize the localities to protect, the watershed through conservation and forestry. We've proven that. It's built into the TMDL model. And our smaller rural localities struggle. And they need assistance just like the larger MS4 localities. Our smaller 4 localities need help in reaching those TMDL goals. And this is one tool that the commission identified in assisting those localities within that Rappahannock River Basin to reach those goals.
As written though, Delegate Hodges, I mean, we're not talking about just the small ones. This would be everybody.
This would be everybody. But this is what we've identified within our region to.
Yeah, for
and assist. And really, this would be for everyone, but when you look at it, it would only apply to really the folks that are taking advantage of this.
Those who would, this was aimed at addressing a concern expressed by, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, this was aimed at expressing a concern expressed by the non-MS4 localities. And it would be an expansion of the program, but Delegate Orrock's suggestion, one thing I would respond is a quarter of a loaf is better than a half.
I would agree to that.
Would it get the votes to pass?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm not sure it would, so no need.
And you're looking at a very small number of localities.
I ain't gonna bail water out of a sinking ship.
Yes, sir.
You know. Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Delegate Orrock.
I move EBI amendment.
Okay, there's a motion on the table to pass the bill by indefinitely. It's properly seconded. All those signify their support of the measure on the voting board. Voting. Okay, please close the roll. Measure to pass by definitely passes 7-1. Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got 26 of them, that's the first one along. Got a couple more.
Well, yeah.
So we have 2 more. All right, let's move forward with House Bill 1035. And if you recall, a couple of years ago, I created the Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Advisory Committee in statute, which a lot of folks don't like to say that. They refer to it as the GWAC. Those folks worked over 2 years and worked very hard to beat their heads and to come up with solutions for the depletion of the Potomac Aquifer in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We do have some substitute language, hot off the press. Can we get that? Is this okay for now? Is it in the proper format? Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
And this would be after the 3 little new sentence, replacing the language in line 17.
All right, council, could you direct us to the, is this an amendment or a substitute? Or?
Mr. Chairman, this would be drafted in the form of a substitute. This language that you see here on the sheet would replace all of the language on lines 17 through 20.
Move the amendment.
All right, the amendment's been moved and seconded, or substitute, was that a?
It would be a substitute.
Yes, sir, should be a substitute. Is that?
Moving substitute.
Okay, the substitute's been moved, is there a second?
Second.
All right, the substitute's been moved and seconded, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the bill substitute is before us.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Ora?
So Keith, if I understand, the Virginia Water Supply Revolving Fund is available throughout the Commonwealth.
Yes, sir.
If we pass this, then they're considering the prioritization of who gets the monies.
Basically, what this new language has done, only that prioritization now only applies to those projects in the Eastern Virginia groundwater management area. So we're not, looking at monies from Southwest and so forth. So this should address those concerns with this new language.
But
Chairman.
I guess to.
Yeah, I understand where you're going.
Yeah, to follow up, and maybe can you correct, I presume there's a pot of money.
Sure.
And right now, under the existing language of code through line 16, that's how they utilize and allocate, and the funds are they being underused, or are they always maxing out? Would be my first question. And then the second, in spite of your statement, I don't see how this language would give priority no matter where the project is with the total amount of money in the kitty. We gotta give preference to the funding of the projects down in the Eastern Tidewater. If you can speak to that in
Sure.
general.
Right now, the way I understand it, there's a little over $31 million, I believe, whether or not 100% is allocated or not. I believe it's 31 and some change. About 30 projects a year, is the way I understand it. But you know that 70% of those now go to Southwest Virginia. And this new revised language, which is actually coming from the department, is hot off the press, and from what I understand it does not supplant priority for the Safe Drinking Water Act. But I think is some of the things that you were getting to. But the way I understand it, I may defer to some folks here that developed this language, and they got together between the last meeting and this meeting and developed this language. So may defer to them to answer those questions, how they arrived at this language to solve that very issue, which was, one of the concerns.
All right, before we hear from anyone else, Judge Bullock.
Chairman, and if I could, I gotta run back down to another committee. I guess there are two things I wanted to bring to your attention, and maybe I'll leave it to the good delegate Orrock to help fix it.
Mr.
projects, and that, I think we potentially unanticipatedly would put all projects in the eastern groundwater management area ahead of projects statewide if we don't add language that says projects within, that are within that groundwater management area. So what you're talking about are projects that are competing with other projects within that groundwater management area. But I think you need that extra clause in there, and I think that was your intent. And the other one was just a question about whether preference is the right idea. I think what we're doing is, you know, that you would eventually have some kind of scorecard, you know, that has pros and cons of each kind of project, and one of those scorecard items would be whether you're withdrawing from the groundwater aquifer or not. I'm not sure that we want to have this one thing be the one thing that trumps all other projects. Maybe it is your intent, but if there's an eloquent way to go ahead and say that you're going to score it higher or it gets extra points, I think that maybe gets at more what you're trying to get, rather than saying that these projects always will trump another project, even if it is a groundwater withdrawal project.
I'll let the experts work on that. I'll let the experts handle that, and if I may, I do know the other thing to do.
Okay, well, I guess, yeah, wish to speak in favor of the measure?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Varner here on behalf of Mission H2O. Mission H2O is composed of a diverse group of industrial groundwater users, municipal water suppliers, consultants, agricultural interests, all interested in how to better utilize all of our water resources, better coordinate their management, and make sure that they're available for prolonged and long use. In the language and what the First Amendment that Delegate Bulova suggested, I think is appropriate. The intent has always been for the extra boost to apply only to those projects which are located within the geographic area of the Eastern Groundwater Management Area when comparing amongst themselves. So adding that clause in would be correct. On
So, Mr. Chairman, want me to propose the language to do that?
If now is the appropriate time.
Well, I might forget if you keep talking.
I tell you, or,
Working from this, and, Scott, I think you might agree, after the code site is at SEC, if it said for project applications located in the Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Area, comma. So it doesn't give any prioritization to the overall grant process that y'all get first in line. But it makes clear that in that Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Area, among like applications, if you're not withdrawing from the aquifer, you would be given a preferential consideration. I think that achieves it, doesn't it, Scott?
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chairman, I wonder if we could say when evaluating projects.
Mm-hmm. That's what he gets paid to do this, Mr. Chairman.
Council, you're saying on that same line, after water?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Where would you put when evaluating?
Third line down after that code citation. And then we would say, when evaluating projects in the Eastern Virginia groundwater.
Okay.
The board shall give preference.
I'll move that amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Second. All right, moved and seconded that we have that. Everybody clear on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the bill is amended before us. Ms. Warner, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second point that Delegate Bulova brought up was on the use of the word preference. You notice in the existing language in the code, in the original bill, it uses that same term, preference, and I believe that's the basis for the Department of Health developing the criteria for providing those prioritizations that are already in the code. So it's just being consistent with the same terminology so they approach it the same way.
Okay.
You were working here, you can say term of art. I would move, recommend reporting as amended, still doing.
Okay, yeah, I want to hear more from them. Is there anyone in the audience anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the measure? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the measure? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Okay, seeing none. Delegate Hodges,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully we're in pretty good shape, but prioritizing those projects in the Eastern Virginia groundwater management area to incentivize them and to reduce withdrawal from the groundwater aquifer. It was a recommendation of the Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Advisory Committee, the GWAC. So to find a way to do that, this is actually a tool to put pressure on the aquifer. It would be the pleasure of the committee to move forward.
okay, the House Bill 1035 is as the bill as amended is before us. Is there a motion?
You made the
Oh, you,
That was the only amendment, right?
yeah, forgive me. So the motion's been made to report, it's been properly seconded. Okay, all those in favor signify on the voting board. Okay, close the voting, please, and the motion reports a substitute 7-0. Doug Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last one, 1036. Hey, you should have seen how many drafted. Pick and choose. All right, 1036. Do we have anything on that?
We do have a substitute.
We do have a substitute on that.
David, you might not be able to get those right the first time.
Yeah, he starts scrambling at the last minute. Coming out.
I think he's just temporarily out.
If he didn't have it, he came back, he'd have her field.
Okay, is there a motion on the substitute?
Move to adopt.
Is there a second? Moved and second to adopt the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, the substitute is before us. Delegate Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is a recommendation of, really follow-up action from the GWAC. And, you know, really that group met, they worked very hard. We would love to keep the folks around the table and engaged at that level, but that's very hard to do. I mean, those folks were starting to get burned out, and they did yeoman's work and getting things done. All this bill really does is it's a consensus recommendation to have DEQ hold an annual forum to foster continued collaboration on the management of the coastal aquifer. It's also a consensus recommendation to further study and determine the implementation options for groundwater banking and groundwater trading programs. So this bill implements those recommendations. We do have the substitute language, ensures minimal and fiscal impact to DEQ, so there really shouldn't be any fiscal impact, which we always want to
We always aim to please.
Yeah, y'all can meet for nothing.
We got a little bit of a budget. You've left us.
So that's basically what the bill does, to try to move forward with the recommendations from the GWAC.
Mr. Chairman, so.
Delegate Ferris.
So I see here on the back of this amendment, moves the date to no later than 2020. So you're saying you're not gonna meet in 18? I'm a little confused.
And if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll have the folks that were involved in getting together and staying together and working together, speak to that.
Mr. Chairman, we originally did have Shannon Varner again on behalf of Mission H2O. We originally did have the 2019 date in there. It is a complicated issue. I think the department thought that it would take more time before we could actually get to that point where there would be recommendations. There would be ongoing discussions and meetings prior to that just there wouldn't be recommendations due to this body and the State Water Commission until 2020.
But you will continue to meet yearly, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Ferris?
You will continue to meet yearly.
Yes, that is the intent.
That's the report, not the meeting.
Delegate Orrock?
And Mr. Chairman, you just kind of led into, I guess I'm thinking whether you need to or not. I can't think of a time, and David, correct me, I've never seen us put in statute where y'all have to hold an annual forum anywhere for anything. So we're breaking new ground. I have some, understand what the patrons ask is. My initial thought would be, before we put this in code and say they're gonna have to do this forever, and while the agency says they can absorb it in their budget now, no disrespect, I can see in the next governor's budget, there had to be a little bit of money to start doing this forever. And I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, and I question, would we wanna make this rather a Section 1 bill, to have them do a forum and report by 2020, and then that would give us, enough information. Is this something we want to continue? Because the rest of the story, I would suggest, I can see the Rappahannock River Basin coming in and putting that in code for them to run it, and taking local government matches out of, that this is a new policy.
Sure, we're a sunset fix it.
I don't think it fixes it any more than a Section 1 bill telling them to do this, not putting it in code, but directing the department to do what this says and report back by 2020.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Varner?
I want to make sure that you're clear. There's actually two different recommendations within this bill. The first one is for the annual forum. That has nothing to do with the report that is in the 2 clause in the bill. The annual forum is an outgrowth of the GWOC. One of the benefits of that study effort over 2 years was getting everyone around the table, sharing information, learning from DBQ. Did have multiple meetings, multiple subgroups, not asking for anything like that. Just this annual forum where everyone to be brought together, get updated information, share ideas, and very happy that we got some great suggestions from the department to how to make that more manageable, and those are included in the substitute here in the first part. And so that is what would occur annually, and it is something that was of value of all the members of the committee, because it helped for better understanding among the group and as to what was going on and how to better manage the resource and how to make longer term planning decisions, because we don't want to come up 10 years from now and find out that the resource is in worse when it may be than we thought. We'd like to learn that along the way, so industry and municipalities and all users can make the best planning decisions.
Director Taylor, you were standing and.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to make the point that Chairman just made, that the first, the number 1 item in there was in fact give us an annual update. How we doing? Is it getting better or worse? And then number 2 is a more targeted discussion of a work group that whether or not there are recommendations that could be made for trading. So that's why I believe you see a date for that report to be completed in the second element. We have no position on the bill. To Delegate Orrock's point, we'll make annual updates if it's in code or if it's not, as long as that is clearly communicated to us. But we're happy with we have no position on the bill either way.
Director, so what we're looking for, the information and so forth, is there other venue that's already available through?
Well, I'm speculating. The State Water Commission could ask us to show up once a year and give an update. For example, down a marker that there's an expectation that DEQ do that, and I will say, you know, it was a unanimous view of the GWAC to do that, and, you know, from my standpoint, makes a lot of sense, because, you know, we put some significant measures in, people are spending money, how's it going, do we need to do more, how can we react? So that was the idea behind that, and there are many different forums that can happen, but I think the point here was just to lay down a marker that happens on a regular basis and not get lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it is important to have in the code as a direction and a marker. If the State Water Commission, you know, perhaps could ask for an update, but that's not a forum. That is not a place where there would be that bringing together of the users and the suppliers and those who may be having demands to actually express some ideas and discuss ideas. So I think it is appropriate to have it in this kind of format, rather than just leaving it up to whether or not someone asks for it or not.
Dr. Ferris?
Mr. Chairman, I hear what the experts are testifying to here, but we're talking to have a meeting. And y'all have a meeting, but you ain't gotta do a dang thing. And then you can have another meeting. Then you've got another year to report on your meeting. So it's telling us that we won't find out anything from these meetings until July 1 of 2020. I think if these meetings are necessary, I think there needs to be a report made from the studies of the findings of those meetings, need to be made to the Director of the Department of Environmental Quality no later than 60 days after that meeting. Let's put some time on it. So if we're gonna request at the meeting, we get something out of it. My cousin's been here longer than I have. That's my thought.
If I can,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chad.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out that the bolded language, the two clause, really should be separated from that first point about the annual meetings. That isn't necessarily to produce a report, first portion of this bill. This is to bring people together, to get educated out in the community, not to educate necessarily DEQ. There would certainly be some of that coming from the users and the providers and all of that. But that portion is not to produce a report, but to bring people together to communicate and give feedback both ways.
Delegate O'Rourke?
Mr. Chairman, I understand what the gentleman's saying, but we really are, I've never seen us write in code where you gotta have an annual forum in a specific region. I think we're gonna do this, everyone gets one. So I'm gonna move to amend the substitute by striking everything lines 10 through 23. Because I don't know of anything, as I heard Mr. Palin mention, if they ask for this, y'all are gonna go down there and get the information, just as you would if Rappahannock River Basin asked for it or anywhere else. And we don't have that in code. And then I think that separates the two issues. And Scott would know better, but then we make it a Section 1 bill directing the department to establish the trading work group. And that would be my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
So, a second.
All right, everybody understand the amendment?
Good. If that's the case, if I may speak to the amendment.
Delegate Hodges?
If I can make a recommendation, that this is the will of the committee, to possibly ask the chairman to write a letter to the director asking for this forum and to continue the dialogue. One thing is, it is very important for these folks to communicate, to get together, and to have this dialogue. That was the beauty of that work group. They went through a lot to come up with these recommendations that we have here today. And bringing it, there's a lot of misinformation about the aquifer. There's a lot of good information about the aquifer, but these folks need to be brought together, to get an update from the department, to talk with each other, and work together to solve this problem. This is actually one of the biggest problems this General Assembly has to deal with, is because You can talk about gas, you can talk about oil all you want, but if you don't have water, you don't have anything. You know, we're talking about too much of it, some areas in the previous bills, but here, you know, if you don't have access to fresh water, you don't have anything. You don't have business, you don't have life. So we need to stay engaged, and we need to keep these stakeholders engaged, and it's very important to do that. So that's my comments, but to come up with the recommendations, it's a long, growing process to come up with recommendations. We are making progress. The aquifer, I will tell you, is at least stabilized with the hard work of DEQ and all of the stakeholders in the permit process. It's at least stabilized, but we need to move forward and keep these folks engaged. So with that, my 2 cents. I can keep talking, but if that would work.
We haven't adopted the amendments.
No,
But that's just speaking to the amendments.
Right, correct.
If that would possibly be in order.
And I think Delegate Bloxham, did I see you? Good. Director Taylor?
Mr. Chair, I think the overall concept works fine. I'm seeing that there maybe is a little bit more editing that we would think needs to be done to clear up a few things. You want me to try to edit it on the fly?
Mr. Chairman, may I make a suggestion?
Delegate Orrock?
I would ask, could we act on the pending amendment motion, and if we adopt that, then ask the bill to go by for the day? Okay, we'll just kill it now.
Excuse me? Okay, what's Delegate Orrock's proposing is that we adopt his proposed amendment, and then we pass the bill by to allow the director to get, some language corrections that he's looking for.
Mr. Chair, for example, the last sentence still refers to an annual forum that may not exist anymore.
Right.
There's some question about who would be the chair of it and who would convene it, and I just would like to have the opportunity to have some discussions so we get a clean version to look at.
Okay, so back on the original amendment to the substitute proposed by Delegate Orrock, everybody remember that? 10 through 23, omitting that.
Go.
Excuse me?
Just go.
Yeah, we're omitting that. So is there a motion?
You made a motion, I second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the substitute is amended is before us. Now is there a motion for the
I
bill?
move to go by for the day.
Second.
Moved and seconded to go by for the day. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay. Doug Hodges, I will close with saying thank you, and all the folks in this room that is, hats off to you, sir, and all the folks that helped. It will never be said that you are not doing yeoman's work for your community, your district, your area. I mean, hats off to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for your time, and thanks to everyone that's worked so hard on all of these good pieces of legislation. I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Don't like them at Oscars.
I don't know, I like you that much.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks to all the little people, yes.
Delegate Stolly.
Mr. Chairman, after a long subcommittee meeting, I'm pleased to bring this very simple little wastewater abuse bill before you. Mr. Chairman, we have an amendment, it's an enactment clause, if we can bring that up.
Mr. Chairman, on line 29 at the very end of the bill, we would have a second enactment, and it would say that the provisions of this act regarding the transfer or assignment of the lease of a general oyster planting ground shall be effective retroactively to July 1, 1966.
We were both born. He won't.
Okay, is there a motion on the amendment?
I'll move it.
Okay, the motion then seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, the bill as amended is before us. Delegate Stolly.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I'd like to thank all the people that have done just an incredible amount of work trying to get the bill to this point. I have to bring to the committee's attention that not too long ago, I heard that there is a current court case involving this as well. My understanding is the court case has been put on hold pending the outcome of the General Assembly discussion. However, I think we typically don't take up issues when there is a court case pending. So, a lot of work done here on getting this bill here. I did not know that there was a court case until a very little while ago.
And, Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Orr.
would it be correct, Delegate Stolle, that the enactment clause would have us basically rule on the pending court case as to the validity of something that has happened previously? That's ergo why we go back to 66.
No, sir, this is a little bit different. So, and we could, if you'd like, I could
No,
get
that's
into
okay.
it, but it's unrelated, true unrelated.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Bloxham.
I do need to publicly also apologize to Commissioner Poole. He did some work for me on this bill on my behalf, and I think he got tainted with them doing it on their behalf. And we were working together to try to get something that would work between Virginia Beach and the shellfish growers. So publicly, I just needed to apologize to Commissioner Poole, because he was doing what I asked him to do, and I forwarded it to Virginia Beach to give them the courtesy over what I was thinking, and it was misconstrued in the press that it was something we were doing behind the door, you know. So I just wanted to publicly say that.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up, Delegate Bloxham. Okay, back to Delegate Stolle. I'm hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I think it is the tradition of the General Assembly, we do not take up bills that have current cases pending.
It is.
I would request that we pass by indefinitely.
So moved.
Second. Okay, at the bill patron's request, the bill be passed by indefinitely. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying so on the electronic voting board. Please close the rolls. The motion to pass by indefinitely passes 7-0. The good news is we'll probably see it again. Delegate Stolle, thank you for your patience and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Say that judge somewhere smarter than we are.
The only on the docket, has anybody heard from Delegate O'Quinn?
Mr. Chairman, move to go by for the day.
All right, there's a motion that House Bill 805 go by for the day. There's a motion that House Bill 805 go by for the day. It's been properly second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, the House Bill 805 goes by for the day. I believe that clears the docket. Okay, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.
No, thank you. No, I didn't.
Already did.